Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be looking at boundaries.
Boundary.
And we hear that word a lot, but what does it really even mean?
Right.
What are we talking about when we say boundaries? Well, we're going to be taking a deep dive into this concept of boundaries.
Yes.
And we're going to be drawing heavily from the book Boundaries. When to say yes, how to say no to take control of your life.
Great book.
By Henry Cloud and John Townsend.
Yeah.
So we'll be pulling a lot of our content from this book.
And this is a really rich topic.
It is.
And this is a deep dive.
Yeah.
Into a deep dive.
Yeah, this is a deep, deep dive.
So we'll be coming back to this topic over multiple episodes.
Absolutely. And, we're going to help you in this deep dive understand what boundaries are, why they're important, and how to start building and maintaining healthy boundaries in every area of your life.
Exactly.
So to start off with kind of a basic understanding, you can think of boundaries like property lines.
Yeah.
If you think about your house, you have property lines that define where your property begins and ends.
Right.
And those property lines are there to protect what's yours.
Right.
They're there to keep people from trespassing, from taking what's yours, from violating what's yours.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same way, we need boundaries in our lives to protect our well-being,
Right.
to protect our physical space,
Mm-hmm.
our emotional space, our mental space, our time, our energy, all of those things.
Our money.
Our money, yeah.
Their resources.
Our resources. All of that needs to be protected.
Our stuff.
Our stuff.
Yeah. And the thing about boundaries is they define us.
Yes.
They make us who we are.
Yeah. And so when we don't have good boundaries, what happens is other people come in and
Take our stuff.
they take our stuff.
To use our stuff.
Or we give our stuff away.
Right.
And we end up feeling resentful and taken advantage of.
Yes. And we end up being controlled by other people and their demands.
Absolutely. So in this book, Cloud and Townsend use a lot of really helpful analogies to help us understand this concept of boundaries. And one of my favorite analogies is this idea of a fence.
Yes.
They talk about how a fence is there to keep the good in and the bad out.
Right.
And in the same way, our boundaries are there to keep the good stuff in our lives and to keep the bad stuff out.
Yeah. And a fence is not a wall.
Right.
It's not this like concrete barrier.
Yeah.
It has gates.
It has gates.
You can open it.
Yeah.
You can let things in. You can let things out.
And you decide when to open the gate and when to close the gate.
Oh, it's your gate.
It's my gate, yeah.
You're in charge of the gate.
I'm the gatekeeper.
You are the gatekeeper.
I like that.
And so we want to be really intentional about what we allow into our lives and what we keep out.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that people misunderstand about boundaries.
Yeah.
They think that setting boundaries is about shutting people out,
Right.
about isolating ourselves,
Being mean and
being mean.
not letting anyone in.
And it's not about that at all.
Not at all.
It's about creating healthy and loving relationships.
Yes.
And that's what we're going to be diving into in this deep dive.
Absolutely. And we're going to be talking about the fact that a lot of us struggle with boundaries.
We do.
It's a very common struggle.
It is.
Maybe we're afraid of disappointing other people
Right.
or making them mad or losing their love.
Yeah.
Maybe we feel guilty
Guilty, yeah.
for saying no.
Yeah.
But setting boundaries is not about being selfish.
Right.
It's not about building walls. It's about creating a safe and healthy space for ourselves.
Yes. And in their book, Cloud and Townsend talk about these two main categories of boundary problems.
Okay.
And they call it the compliance and the controllers.
I love that.
Yeah. Have you ever met anyone who just can't seem to say no?
All the time.
Right.
Yeah.
No matter how detrimental it is to their own well-being,
Oh, yeah.
they just keep saying yes, yes, yes.
Right.
And they end up feeling completely overwhelmed and resentful.
Yeah.
So that's the classic example of a compliant personality.
Right. And you see it.
You see it all the time.
And I think that's why this book is so helpful, because these are things that we see all the time.
Yes.
And then we can put a name on it.
Yes.
Like, oh, that's a compliant.
That's a compliant, yeah.
And I always think about the story they tell about Robert.
Oh, Robert.
Yeah, he's the guy who's going broke, trying to keep up with his wife's lavish spending habits.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's terrified of upsetting her.
He just wants to keep her happy.
He just wants to keep her happy.
But he's sacrificing his own financial security
Right.
to avoid conflict. And, a lot of times this stems back to childhood.
It does.
Imagine a child growing up in a home where saying no was met with disapproval or punishment.
Oh, I don't even have to imagine it.
Yeah.
I know people who have.
Yeah. And so those kids learn to equate boundaries with rejection or danger.
Yeah, that's scary.
And so they grow up afraid to say no
Right?
because they don't want to experience that rejection or that danger.
And so they become people pleasers, and they're always trying to keep everybody happy.
But the problem is you can't keep everyone happy.
No, you can't, and you shouldn't.
They shouldn't. Yeah.
It's impossible.
It's impossible.
And it's actually not healthy
Not healthy at all.
because you end up losing yourself.
You lose yourself.
You lose your own identity.
Yeah.
You lose your own voice.
And now let's talk about the flip side,
Okay.
the controllers.
The controllers.
And these are the folks who have a really hard time accepting no for an answer.
Yes.
They struggle to take responsibility for their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so they project that responsibility onto others.
Right. And they manipulate
They manipulate.
to get what they want.
Yeah.
They guilt people into doing what they want.
And they try to control everyone around them.
They're control freaks.
They are control freaks.
Yeah. And the example that always comes to mind is Steve the boss.
Oh, Steve the boss.
He demands unpaid overtime. He calls his assistant at home during dinner.
Oh my gosh.
He completely disregards any attempts to set limits.
Yeah, it's like he doesn't even see those property lines.
Right.
He's just barging right through them.
He doesn't care. He doesn't care.
And the thing is, both the compliance and the controllers,
yeah.
they're both seeking connection,
Yeah.
but they're going about it in very unhealthy ways.
Yeah. And ultimately, it backfires
It does.
because neither approach fosters genuine intimacy or respect.
Right.
You know, it's like they're speaking different languages.
Yeah.
And neither one understands what the other is really saying.
Right.
So how do we break free from these unhealthy patterns
Yeah.
and start building healthier boundaries?
It all starts with understanding how those boundaries actually develop.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, it actually starts way back in childhood.
I know. It's fascinating to me that it starts so early.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think that little babies are thinking about boundaries.
Yeah, they don't even know what a boundary is.
Right. But they're starting to form those patterns.
There are. And in the book, Cloud and Townsend talk about this 3-phase journey of boundary development.
Okay.
And they call it hatching, practicing, and rapprochement.
Big words.
Big words.
Let's break it down.
Yes.
So hatching is that first phase.
Yeah.
And it happens when babies start to differentiate themselves from their mothers.
So like, hey, I'm a separate person.
I'm not you, you're not me.
I'm over here.
Yeah.
I love that.
And then the practicing phase. This is
Yeah.
when toddlers, they're full of energy, they're curious, they're exploring the world,
They're into everything.
they're into everything.
Yeah.
And they need those clear, consistent boundaries from their parents to learn what's safe and what's not.
Yeah.
Think about it. You need to keep them from falling down the stairs.
The baby gate.
You need those baby gates.
Yeah.
You need to keep them from sticking forks in the electrical socket,
From eating dirt.
from eating dirt. Yeah.
All that good stuff.
All those things. And so it's those boundaries that teach them self-control and help them understand the consequences of their actions.
And then the final phase is called rapprochement.
Yes.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because this is when toddlers start to realize they can't do everything they want.
I can't have all the cookies.
They can't have all the cookies.
I can't stay up all night.
I can't just hit my brother when I'm mad.
Exactly.
All those important lessons.
And this is when that powerful word no emerges.
Yeah, and that's huge because they're starting to assert their own boundaries.
Yeah.
And it's so important for parents to support those no's without withdrawing love or getting angry.
Yes. Because if you punish them for saying no,
Yeah.
then they're going to learn that their no is bad
Yeah.
and their needs are bad.
And their feelings are bad.
And then they're going to grow up being afraid to say no.
And that's where those boundary problems can start to develop.
Exactly.
And so we're going to talk more about that in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
Because we're going to be exploring what happens when those boundaries are injured.
Ooh, that sounds scary.
It can be. It can be.
And it's also very healing
It is.
to understand where those injuries come from.
Absolutely. And so we'll be back next time to unpack all of that. See you then. Bye.
So we were talking about those boundary injuries.
Right. Those times when our attempts to set boundaries were met with, you know,
disapproval.
disapproval or,
Yeah.
or, you know, those times when our boundaries were just completely ignored.
Right.
And so we're going to dive a little deeper into that and talk about how those boundary injuries can manifest in our adult lives.
Yeah, because they do.
They really do.
And sometimes in very subtle ways.
Yeah, it's like those wounds from our childhood,
Mm-hmm.
they kind of stay with us
They do.
and they shape how we interact with the world.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful to go back to those two main categories,
Okay.
the compliance and the controllers.
Yeah.
Because, those patterns often stem from those early boundary injuries, and they can create some serious roadblocks in our relationships.
Absolutely. So let's explore those a little bit more.
Okay, so compliance.
Yeah.
They're often driven by this deep fear of rejection or abandonment.
Okay.
And remember Robert, the guy who's going broke trying to please his wife?
Oh, yeah. Poor Robert.
That's a classic example
Of a compliant.
of a compliant.
Yeah.
They're always walking on eggshells.
Terrified of upsetting anyone.
Right.
And so they end up sacrificing their own needs and well-being just to keep the peace.
And it can be so subtle.
It really can.
It's not always about those grand gestures.
Right.
It can be about those everyday interactions,
Like what?
like agreeing to plans they don't want to do,
Oh, yeah.
or taking on extra work when they don't have the time.
Or constantly apologizing,
Yes.
even when they haven't done anything wrong.
It's that pattern of self-neglect
Mm-hmm.
that can really leave them feeling drained and resentful.
It's like they're slowly erasing themselves, trying to become invisible so that they don't rock the boat.
But that invisibility comes at a high cost
Yeah, it does.
because you end up losing yourself.
You really do.
You lose your own identity.
And the irony is they're trying so hard to avoid conflict, but they often end up creating more conflict.
Because all that resentment builds up.
It does.
And eventually it explodes.
So let's talk about the controllers.
Okay, the controllers.
They're kind of the opposite.
They
Or
are,
the compliance.
yeah, instead of shrinking back,
Yeah.
they try to control their environment and the people around them.
So it's like they're overcompensating for that early sense of powerlessness.
Exactly.
They're trying to exert control wherever they can.
Right.
Okay.
They might become micromanagers,
Oh, yeah.
constantly criticizing and correcting others.
Or they might resort to manipulation,
Oh, yeah.
guilt trips, even threats
Yeah.
to get their way.
It's all about maintaining that sense of control
Okay.
so that they don't have to feel that inner chaos.
But I imagine that creates a lot of tension in their relationships
It does.
because people don't generally respond well to feeling controlled or manipulated.
No, they don't.
Right.
They might comply
Out of fear.
out of fear or obligation.
Yeah.
But it's not true intimacy.
Right, because it's not based on respect.
Exactly.
It's based on fear.
Right. And there's that constant power struggle that undermines any kind of healthy connection.
It's like they're building walls instead of bridges.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we've explored those two patterns,
Yeah.
but let's talk about some specific examples
Okay.
of how these boundary injuries can show up in our everyday lives.
Yeah, because I think sometimes we don't even realize
Right.
that we're struggling with boundaries
Right.
until we start to see those patterns.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So do you find yourself
Yeah.
constantly saying yes to things you don't want to do?
Ooh, guilty.
Yeah.
I think we've all been there
Yeah.
at some point.
Even if it means overcommitting yourself
Yeah.
or sacrificing your own needs.
Or, maybe you have trouble saying no, even when you know you should.
Yeah,
And that's a big one
it is.
for a lot of people.
And another sign is feeling responsible for other people's emotions.
Oh, yeah.
Do you find yourself walking on eggshells around certain people?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
Certain people.
Worried about upsetting them?
Yeah.
Or triggering a negative reaction?
It's like you're constantly trying to anticipate their needs and adjust your behavior accordingly.
Yeah. And it's exhausting.
It's so exhausting.
Another sign is feeling guilty or selfish
Oh, yeah.
when you do try to prioritize your own needs.
It's like that inner critic is
Yeah,
saying,
I'm not allowed to say no.
you're being selfish.
You're a bad person.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to put yourself first.
And that inner critic can be so loud sometimes.
Oh my gosh.
It's like it's trying to keep us stuck in those old patterns.
It is.
So what about those situations
Yeah.
where we're dealing with people who are draining or disrespectful?
Yes.
Do you have trouble setting limits
Right.
in those situations?
Yeah, maybe it's a friend who
Yeah.
constantly dumps their problems on you.
Oh, I've got a couple of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But doesn't offer any support in return.
Right. Or a family member who's constantly criticizing you.
Right.
Or a coworker
Yeah.
who takes credit for your ideas
Yeah.
or constantly interrupts you.
Right.
Yeah. And those are all signs
They are.
that we need to work on our boundaries.
Yeah. If you're feeling resentful or angry
Yeah.
or burnt out
Yeah.
in those relationships,
That's a huge red flag
it is.
that boundaries are lacking.
Yeah.
And so if we're noticing some of these patterns, how do we start shifting them
Right.
and building healthier boundaries?
It's not an overnight process,
Okay.
but it is possible.
Okay.
And the great thing about this work is that it's an act of self-love.
Okay.
It's recognizing that you deserve to be treated with respect,
Yeah.
that your needs matter, and that it's okay to prioritize your well-being.
I love that.
Yeah, it's not about being selfish. It's about honoring yourself and creating the space for healthier, more fulfilling relationships.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful way to frame it.
Yeah, so let's talk about some practical steps.
Okay, give me the steps.
All right, so the first step is to understand your own boundary history.
Okay.
Take some time to reflect on your childhood experiences.
Okay.
What messages did you receive about setting limits?
Okay.
Were your needs and feelings respected?
Okay.
Were you allowed to express your opinions?
Mm-hmm.
Were you punished for saying no?
So it's like we're trying to uncover those early patterns
Yes.
that might be influencing our behavior today.
Exactly. It's like digging into the roots of a plant.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So,
To understand why it's not thriving.
yeah.
So once you start to understand those underlying patterns,
Yeah.
you can start to challenge them and create new, healthier ways of relating to yourself and others.
So let's say we've done that inner work.
Okay.
We've identified some areas where we need to set stronger boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
What's next?
The next step is to start setting those limits.
Okay, how do we do that?
And it often begins with that powerful two-letter word.
No.
No.
I knew you were going to say that,
It might feel uncomfortable at first.
especially if you're a people pleaser.
Especially if you're a people pleaser.
Yeah.
But it gets easier with practice.
It's like a muscle.
It is.
The more you use it,
Mm-hmm.
the stronger it gets.
The stronger it gets.
Yeah, and we don't have to be harsh or confrontational
Right.
when we say no.
We can be kind and compassionate
Yeah.
while still being firm and assertive.
So give me an example.
Okay. So instead of saying, no, I can't help you with that, you might say, I really appreciate you asking,
Okay.
but I'm already feeling overwhelmed with my own commitments right now.
So you're acknowledging their request.
Right.
But you're still holding your boundary.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that.
And you don't have to justify your boundary.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Your no is enough.
Your no is enough.
You don't owe anyone an explanation.
I love that.
So let's talk about those situations where you do want to say yes,
Okay.
but you need to set some limits.
Yeah, because that happens a lot too.
It does.
Where you want to help,
Right.
but you can't do everything that they're asking.
So it's all about setting clear expectations up front.
Okay.
Maybe it's about setting a time limit for a phone call,
Okay.
or specifying what kind of help you're willing to offer.
Okay.
Or maybe it's about clarifying your boundaries around communication,
Like what?
like letting people know that you don't check emails after work hours.
Okay. So it's about being proactive
Yes.
and communicating those limits
Right.
before they become a source of resentment or conflict.
Exactly. It's about setting yourself up for success
Okay.
and creating that framework for healthy interactions.
Yeah. I like that.
Now, let's talk about detaching with love.
Oh, detaching with love.
This is a big one.
Yeah.
And it's especially important when you're dealing with people who are draining or disrespectful.
Okay.
So what does that mean?
Yeah. What does it mean to detach with love?
It means recognizing that you can't control other people's behavior,
Right.
but you can control your own reactions.
Okay.
So instead of getting caught up in their drama or trying to fix their problems,
Yeah.
you choose to step back and
Okay.
create some emotional distance.
So it's about protecting your own energy.
Yes.
Without cutting them off completely.
Exactly. It's not about rejecting them.
Okay.
It's about setting those healthy boundaries to preserve your own sanity
Okay.
and to create the space for them to take responsibility for their own lives.
And that takes a lot of compassion and self-awareness.
It does. So it's not easy. It's not easy, but it's a powerful act of self-love.
Yeah.
And it allows you to show up in your relationships in a healthier, more sustainable way.
Okay, so we've talked about saying no,
Yes.
setting clear expectations, and detaching with love.
Yeah.
Are there any other practical strategies that we can implement?
Yeah. Practice assertive communication.
What does that mean?
It means expressing your needs and your feelings clearly and directly
Okay.
without being aggressive or passive-aggressive.
So it's about finding that sweet spot
Yes.
between being too timid and too forceful?
Exactly. It's about advocating for yourself while still respecting the other person.
Okay.
And it's a skill that takes practice,
It does.
but it's so worth it.
Yeah.
Assertive communication is essential for setting and maintaining those healthy boundaries.
And, I think one of the things that holds people back from setting boundaries
Yeah.
is that fear of hurting someone's feelings
Right.
or creating conflict.
Yes, that's a very common concern.
Yeah, because we want to be liked.
We do.
Yeah.
We want to be accepted.
Yeah, and we don't want to rock the boat.
But setting boundaries is not about being mean or rejecting someone. Okay.
It's about honoring yourself
Yeah.
and creating a safe space for healthy interactions.
So it's a shift in perspective.
Yes.
It's not about hurting them. It's about protecting ourselves and
Exactly.
setting a standard for how we want to be treated.
Right. And you can't control how other people react.
Right.
Some people might be surprised
Yeah.
or even upset
Yeah.
when you start setting boundaries,
Especially if they're used to getting their way.
especially if you're used to getting their way.
Yeah.
But that's their issue, not yours.
Right.
You're not responsible for their emotions.
Okay.
Your responsibility is to take care of yourself
Mm-hmm.
and to communicate your needs clearly and respectfully.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we
Yeah.
forget that,
We do.
and we take on that responsibility for other people's feelings.
And you might be surprised to find that many people will actually respect and appreciate your boundaries
Okay.
once they understand where you're coming from
So it's about setting that standard.
and creating a healthier dynamic in the relationship.
Exactly. And remember, setting boundaries is not a one-time event.
Okay.
It's an ongoing process
Yeah.
that requires constant awareness and adjustment.
So we need to be flexible and adaptable
Yes.
while still staying true to ourselves
Exactly.
and our needs.
It's all about finding that balance.
Okay.
Now let's talk about self-care.
Oh, self-care.
Because self-care is a crucial part of setting boundaries.
Okay. I'm intrigued. How does that work?
Well, when you're feeling depleted or stressed or overwhelmed,
Yeah.
it's much harder to set and maintain those healthy boundaries.
It's like we're running on fumes
Yes.
and we don't have the energy to prioritize our own needs.
Exactly. So self-care is not a luxury.
Okay.
It's a necessity.
Okay.
It's about replenishing your energy
Mhm.
and nurturing your well-being so you can show up as your best self
Yeah.
in your relationships.
Yeah, because if we're not taking care of ourselves,
Right.
we can't take care of anyone else.
Right. Exactly. So what are some examples of self-care practices?
Yeah, give me some examples.
So it might involve setting aside time for activities you enjoy,
Like what?
like reading
Oh,
or listening to music,
yeah,
spending time in nature, or
Yeah.
connecting with loved ones.
I like those.
Yeah. Or maybe it's about prioritizing your physical health
Okay.
by getting enough sleep.
Sleep is so important.
It is
Yeah.
eating nourishing foods
Yeah.
and moving your body.
And let's not forget about mental and emotional self-care,
Yes.
which might involve practicing mindfulness,
Mm-hmm.
journaling,
Yeah.
seeking therapy,
Mm-hmm.
or simply allowing yourself to feel your emotions without judgment.
It's all about finding what works for you
Oh.
and making it a priority in your life.
I love that it's about creating that self-care toolkit
Yes.
that you can draw from whenever you need to recharge.
Exactly. And remember, self-care is not selfish.
Right.
It's an act of self-love.
Yeah.
And it's essential for setting and maintaining those healthy boundaries.
It's like putting on your own oxygen mask first
Yes.
before helping others.
Exactly.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
Now let's talk about the difference between responsibility and control.
Okay, because I think those two concepts get confused a lot.
They do, and
Yeah.
it's a crucial distinction to make.
Okay.
So we are responsible for ourselves,
Okay.
but we're not responsible for controlling other people's behavior.
Okay, so it's about recognizing where our responsibility ends
Yes.
and someone else's begins.
Exactly.
Okay.
We can be responsible to others,
Yeah.
meaning we can love and support them,
Mm.
but we can't control their choices or their behavior.
And trying to control others
Yeah,
is a recipe for frustration and resentment.
it is.
Yeah, it's a losing battle.
It is.
It's like trying to hold sand in your hand.
Yes,
The tighter you grip, the more it slips away.
exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we differentiate between healthy responsibility and unhealthy control?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
It is, especially if you're someone who's naturally inclined to help others.
Or fix their problems.
Fixers.
Yeah.
We love to fix things.
We do. But one way to distinguish between the two
Okay.
is to ask yourself, am I trying to control the outcome
Okay.
or am I simply offering support?
So if you're offering advice that's not being asked for,
Right.
or if you're trying to manipulate someone into doing what you want,
Yes.
that's a sign that you're crossing the line.
You're crossing the line
Yeah.
into control territory.
Control freak territory.
Yes.
So healthy responsibility is
Yeah.
about respecting the other person's agency
Yes.
and allowing them to make their own choices.
Even if you don't agree with them.
Even if we don't agree with them.
It's about offering support without strings attached, without expecting anything in return.
I like that.
It's about letting go of that need to fix or control the situation
Yeah.
and trusting that the other person is capable of navigating their own life.
And that can be really hard.
It can.
for some of us.
Especially those fixers.
Especially the fixers.
Yeah. But it's so important.
It is. It's about letting go of that illusion of control and embracing the reality that we're each responsible for our own lives.
Oh, and that's actually very freeing.
It
When we can let go of that need to control everyone and everything.
So we've talked about a lot of different strategies for setting boundaries, understanding our boundary history, learning to say no, setting clear expectations, detaching with love, practicing assertive communication, prioritizing self-care, and differentiating between responsibility and control.
It's a lot
It is.
to take in, but it's so important.
Yeah. What are some key takeaways that we can leave our listeners with?
So remember that setting boundaries is an act of self-love.
Okay.
It's not selfish. It's about honoring yourself
Yeah.
and creating the space for healthier, more fulfilling relationships.
And it's an ongoing process.
It is.
Right.
Be patient with yourself.
Yeah. Celebrate your successes. And don't be afraid to ask for support along the way.
It's not about being perfect. It's about progress.
Exactly.
So let's talk about what success with boundaries actually looks like.
Okay.
Because it's not just about being able to say no.
Right.
Or setting limits.
It's about so much more than that.
Yeah, what is it about?
It's about creating a life that feels authentic
Okay.
and aligned with your values. It's about experiencing greater freedom, peace, and joy in your relationships.
I love that.
Yeah, and it's about developing the capacity to love yourself and others more deeply and authentically.
It's about creating a life that feels spacious and expansive.
Yes.
Where you have the energy and the emotional bandwidth to show up fully for yourself and for the people that you care about.
And to do the things that you love.
Yes.
To pursue your passions.
Yes.
To live a life that feels meaningful.
That's what it's all about.
It is.
Yeah. So let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And explore how these boundary principles play out.
Yeah.
In different areas of our lives.
Yeah. Because we've been talking about relationships in general.
Right.
But I think it's helpful to get more specific.
Yeah.
And look at how boundaries function in those key areas.
Okay.
Where we often struggle the most.
Yeah, and where we need them the most.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start with one of the most challenging and often boundaryless relationships.
Okay.
Family.
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 Those wonderful, complex, sometimes frustrating people.
Yes.
Who know how to push our buttons like no one else.
Like no one else. They know exactly where they are.
They do.
Yeah, and so family dynamics can be incredibly challenging.
They can.
Especially when it comes to setting boundaries.
Yeah, because we often feel obligated to say yes.
Or to put up with behaviors that we wouldn't tolerate.
Right.
From anyone else.
From anyone else.
It's like we've signed those invisible loyalty contracts.
We do.
At birth.
We do.
And so we feel guilty for setting limits.
Yes.
Especially with our parents.
Especially with our parents.
Or our siblings.
Yeah. And that guilt is real.
It is.
It's deeply ingrained.
Yeah.
Often rooted in those cultural expectations.
Yeah.
Societal norms.
Like you're supposed to do anything for your family.
Yeah, you're supposed to always be there for them.
Right.
No matter what.
No matter what. And so we end up overextending ourselves.
Right.
And sacrificing our own well-being.
And feeling resentful.
Yes.
But guilt doesn't mean that we're doing something wrong.
Okay.
It's just a feeling.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to dictate our behavior.
So we can acknowledge the guilt and still choose to set boundaries.
Yes.
Yeah.
And remember, setting boundaries with family doesn't mean that we love them any less.
Right.
In fact, it's an act of love because it's about creating healthier, more sustainable relationships that honor everyone's needs and limits.
So how do we set boundaries with family?
So first and foremost, remember that it's okay to say no.
Even to your mom.
Especially to your mom.
Oh.
You're allowed to have your own life, your own preferences, and your own limits.
Okay.
And it's okay to express those limits, even if it means disappointing someone or rocking the boat.
It's about prioritizing your own well-being.
Yes.
And creating a healthier dynamic in the relationship.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you don't have to explain yourself.
Yeah.
Or justify your boundaries.
Your no is enough.
Your no is enough.
Yeah.
So if your mom asks you to do something that you don't want to do,
yeah,
you can simply say,
yeah,
I'm not able to do that right now.
Okay.
You don't owe her a lengthy explanation or a list of excuses.
Okay.
And if she tries to guilt you or manipulate you into changing your mind,
which they often do.
They do.
Yeah.
You can simply reiterate your boundary and disengage from the conversation.
So it's about standing firm.
Yeah.
in your decision.
Right.
Yeah, and not getting sucked into that emotional drama.
Right.
Okay, another helpful tip
Yes.
is to set clear expectations up front.
Right.
So give me an example.
Okay, so if your family tends to drop by unannounced, you can let them know that you appreciate a heads up before they visit.
So you're setting those ground rules.
Exactly. Creating a structure that works for everyone.
Okay. And if they violate those boundaries, then we can gently but firmly remind them.
Exactly.
Okay.
So if they show up unannounced, you might say, I'm glad to see you, but next time, please give me a call before you come over.
Yeah. And I think that's a good example of assertive communication.
It is. It's about communicating your needs in a clear and respectful way.
Without getting angry.
Without getting angry.
Or defensive.
Or defensive.
Yeah.
And remember, it takes time to shift those old patterns.
It does, because they're used to you being the doormat.
Yes.
The people pleaser.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they might be surprised or even resistant when you start setting boundaries. So be patient with them and with yourself.
And don't be afraid to seek support from a therapist or a trusted friend.
Yes.
Setting boundaries with family can be incredibly challenging.
It can be.
And it's okay to ask for help.
Absolutely.
So let's move on to another area where boundaries are crucial.
Okay.
Romantic relationships.
Romantic relationship.
Love and boundaries.
It can be so tricky.
It can be so tricky.
Because those two concepts can seem to be at odds with each other.
Yeah, it's like, how do you maintain your individuality while also merging with another person?
Right.
It's a delicate dance.
It is a delicate dance.
But healthy boundaries are essential.
They are.
For creating a strong and fulfilling romantic relationship.
Yeah, they allow each person to maintain their own sense of self, their own passions and their own space, while still coming together to create that shared life.
And so I think it's important to remember that boundaries are not about keeping your partner out.
Right.
It's about creating a safe and healthy space.
Yes.
For both of you to thrive.
For both of you. So what are some common boundary issues?
Yeah. What are some of the things that come up in romantic relationships?
Well, one common issue is enmeshment.
Enmeshment.
Yes, this is when couples become so intertwined that they lose their sense of individuality.
Oh, yeah.
They might do everything together, share all their thoughts and feelings, and have difficulty making decisions independently.
It's like they become one amorphous blob instead of two distinct individuals.
Exactly. And while some degree of closeness is healthy and desirable in a romantic relationship, too much enmeshment can be suffocating.
It can.
It can lead to resentment, codependency, and a loss of passion.
So it's about finding that balance
between
togetherness and individuality.
Exactly.
What are some other common boundary issues that come up in romantic relationships?
Well, another common one is a lack of emotional regulation.
Okay.
This is when one partner consistently dumps their emotional baggage on the other without taking responsibility for their own feelings.
So it's like they're using their partner as an emotional dumping ground.
Exactly. And it can be incredibly draining for the receiving partner.
It can.
It's important for each person to develop their own emotional intelligence and to learn how to process their emotions in a healthy way.
So if your partner is upset about something, you can offer support and empathy.
Right.
But you don't have to take on their emotions as your own.
You can hold space for them without absorbing their negativity.
Yeah. And it's okay to set boundaries around those conversations.
It is.
You might say, I'm happy to listen.
Yeah.
But I can only talk about this for 30 minutes right now.
Okay.
Or I'm feeling overwhelmed and I need some space to process my own emotions before we can talk about this.
That's a great example of setting a boundary while still being loving and supportive.
So it's not about shutting them down.
No.
It's about taking care of yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, what else?
Another common boundary issue is a lack of respect for personal space and time.
Oh, yeah.
This might involve constantly checking up on your partner.
Demanding to know their whereabouts?
Yeah.
Or trying to control how they spend their time?
It can be very suffocating.
It can.
Yeah.
And it can create a sense of distrust in the relationship.
Yeah, it's like you don't trust me to make my own decisions about my time.
Exactly. So it's important for each person to have their own space, their own interests, and their own time to recharge.
Yeah, to be an individual.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if your partner needs some alone time, Don't take it personally. It's not a rejection.
Okay.
It's a healthy need for self-care and introspection.
And it's about respecting each other's boundaries around communication.
Right.
Maybe you prefer phone calls while your partner prefers texting.
Right.
Or maybe you need some quiet time in the morning before engaging in conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about communicating those preferences
Yeah.
and finding a rhythm that works for both of you.
Yeah. And those rhythms can change over time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so setting boundaries is an ongoing process. Right. It's not like you set them once.
Right.
And then you're done.
And you're done.
Yeah, you have to keep revisiting them.
Yeah. As your relationship evolves, your needs and boundaries might change.
Yeah.
And so it's important to communicate those changes to your partner.
Yeah.
And to be willing to renegotiate those boundaries as needed.
Absolutely.
Oh.
So we've talked about family, we've talked about romantic relationships.
Yes.
Let's talk about another important relationship.
Okay.
Friendships.
Friendships.
You know those cherished connections?
Yes.
That enrich our lives and provide us with support, laughter, and companionship.
Yeah.
I love my friends.
Friends are great.
Yeah.
But they can also be a breeding ground for boundary issues.
They can if we're not careful.
If we're not careful.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we feel obligated to say yes to our friends.
Right.
Even if it means overcommitting ourselves.
Yeah.
Or sacrificing our own needs.
Because we're afraid of disappointing them.
Yeah. Or jeopardizing the friendship.
Yeah. But the truth is, healthy friendships can withstand those boundaries.
They can.
In fact, they're strengthened by them.
They're strengthened by them.
Because when we set boundaries in our friendships, we're communicating that we respect ourselves.
Yeah.
And that we expect to be treated with respect.
That's so important.
It is.
Yeah.
And that level of respect is essential for any healthy relationship.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what are some common boundary issues?
What comes up in friendships?
They come up in friendships?
Well, one common issue is one-sidedness.
One-sidedness, way.
This is when one friend consistently relies on the other for support, advice, and emotional validation without reciprocating.
So it's like one friend is always doing the giving.
Yes.
And the other friend is always doing the taking.
And that gets old.
It does get old. It can be very draining for the giving friend.
Yeah, it's important to have a sense of balance and reciprocity in friendships.
Yeah, so if you're constantly the one lending a listening ear or offering advice, it might be time to have a conversation with your friend about creating a more equitable dynamic.
Yeah.
What are some other boundary issues?
Well, another one is a lack of respect for time and commitments.
Okay.
This might involve constantly canceling plans at the last minute.
Oh, I hate that.
Yeah, or showing up late or not following through on promises.
It's so disrespectful.
It is.
Yeah.
And it can erode the trust in the friendship.
Yeah, because it's like you're not reliable.
Right.
You're not dependable.
So it's important to communicate your expectations clearly.
Yeah.
And to hold your friends accountable when they violate those boundaries.
Sometimes we let things slide with friends.
We do.
Because we don't want to
rock the boat.
Rock the boat.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're afraid we're going to lose the friendship.
But, you know, good friends can handle those conversations.
They can.
And if they can't, then maybe they're not such a good friend after all.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah. So another common boundary issue is gossiping and negativity.
Ooh, the gossipy friends.
Yeah. You know, when friends constantly complain about other people or spread rumors.
Yeah, it creates a toxic environment.
It does.
And it can be really draining.
It is. Yeah. It's important to set boundaries around those conversations.
Yeah.
And to choose to spend time with friends who uplift you and support you.
Yeah, because it's about surrounding yourself with positive energy.
Yes.
And creating a space where you can feel good about yourself and the people in your life.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that.
And remember, setting boundaries in friendships doesn't mean that you're being a bad friend.
Right.
It's actually an act of self-love.
Yeah.
And it's essential for creating healthy, fulfilling relationships.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes we need to remind ourselves of that.
We do.
That it's okay to set boundaries with our friends.
It is.
Yeah.
Because true friends will respect those boundaries.
They will.
And if they don't, then maybe it's time to reevaluate the friendship.
Yeah.
So we've talked about family, romantic relationships, friendships.
Yeah.
Let's talk about another area where boundaries are often lacking.
Okay.
The workplace.
The workplace.
Yeah. Where we spend
a lot of our time.
A significant portion of our lives.
Yeah.
Often sacrificing our time, our energy, and our sanity in pursuit of a paycheck and a sense of purpose.
Right, because we have to work.
We do.
Most of us have to work.
Most of us do.
Yeah, to survive.
Yeah.
And so it's a breeding ground for boundary violations.
It is.
Especially in today's fast-paced, always-on work culture.
It's like we're expected to be available 24/7.
Right, answer emails at all hours.
Right.
Constantly go above and beyond.
Even if it means sacrificing our personal lives and our well-being.
Yeah, our family.
Our health.
Yeah.
But we have the right to set boundaries at work.
We do.
Just like we do in any other area of our lives.
Because it's about protecting our time.
Our energy.
For sanity.
Our sanity.
Yeah.
So what are some common boundary issues?
Yeah. What comes up in the workplace?
Well, one that I've definitely experienced is taking on too much responsibility. Oh, yeah.
You know, that feeling of being the go-to person for everything.
Yeah, even if it's not in your job description.
Even if it's not in your job description.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're afraid to say no.
Right, or to delegate.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we want to be seen as helpful and capable.
Right, or we're afraid we're going to lose our jobs.
Right.
Yeah.
But it can lead to burnout, resentment, and a feeling of being taken advantage of.
Yeah, because you're doing everyone else's work.
Right.
And not getting paid for it.
And not getting paid for it.
Yeah. So it's important to learn how to say no gracefully.
Yes.
And to set limits on what you're willing to take on.
And it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah.
Or to delegate tasks to others.
You don't have to do everything yourself.
You don't have to do everything yourself.
Yeah.
Another common boundary issue is working excessive overtime.
Oh, yeah.
It's like that feeling of being chained to your desk.
Yeah, constantly checking emails.
Right.
Never truly disconnecting from work. It's a recipe for stress, exhaustion, and a lack of work-life balance.
It is.
So it's important to set boundaries around your work hours.
Yeah.
And to protect your personal time.
So maybe you decide not to check emails after a certain time in the evening.
Right.
Or to take a break from work on weekends.
Exactly. It's about creating those clear boundaries between work life and personal life so you can show up fully in both areas.
Yeah, because we need that downtime.
We do.
To recharge.
To recharge.
To reconnect with ourselves.
To reconnect with our family.
And reconnect with our families and friends.
And to pursue our hobbies.
Yes.
So another common boundary issue is dealing with difficult coworkers.
Ooh.
Yeah.
The difficult coworkers.
You know, those colleagues who gossip, micromanage, take credit for your ideas, or constantly interrupt you.
Yeah, we all have at least one of those.
We do.
Yeah.
It can be so draining.
It can.
And it can create a toxic work environment.
Yeah, it can.
So it's important to address those behaviors directly and to set boundaries around how you're willing to interact with those individuals.
So maybe you choose to limit your interactions with them.
Yeah.
Or to avoid engaging in conversations that are negative or unproductive.
Exactly. It's about protecting your energy.
Yeah.
And creating a space where you can focus on your work without feeling drained or stressed.
I like that.
And remember, you have the right to report any behavior
Yes.
that is harassing or discriminatory to your supervisor or to human resources.
You don't have to tolerate a hostile work environment.
You don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes that means standing up for yourself.
It does.
Even if it's scary.
Even if it's scary.
Yeah.
But it's important to protect yourself.
It is.
And to create a workplace where everyone feels safe and respected.
So we've talked about setting boundaries with other people.
Yeah.
But let's talk about another boundary
Okay.
that can be particularly challenging to navigate.
Right.
Setting boundaries with ourselves.
Ourselves.
Ooh, that inner critic.
That inner critic. You know that voice in our heads?
The one that tells us we're not good enough.
That we need to be doing more.
That we should be thinner, richer,
Like,
more successful.
all the shoulds, yeah.
That inner critic can be relentless.
That can be.
And it can sabotage our efforts to set those healthy boundaries in every area of our lives.
Yeah, because if we're constantly beating ourselves up,
Right.
then we're not going to have the energy or the confidence to set boundaries with other people.
Exactly.
So how do we set boundaries with that inner bully?
Well, one of the most important steps is to start noticing those negative thoughts.
Okay.
And to challenge their validity.
So when that voice pops up
Yeah.
and says you're a failure,
Right.
ask yourself,
Is that really true?
is that really true?
Yeah. What evidence do I have to support that thought?
And often when we examine those thoughts more closely, we realize that they're based on fear, insecurity,
or past experiences
that are no longer relevant.
Yeah, it's about separating fact from fiction.
Yes.
Yeah, and choosing to focus on the positive aspects of ourselves and our lives.
Right, and that's where self-compassion comes in.
Self-compassion.
Yeah.
So what is self-compassion?
It means treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer to a close friend.
So instead of beating yourself up for making a mistake,
Right.
You might say to yourself, it's okay, everyone makes mistakes.
Yeah.
I'm learning and growing, and I'm proud of myself for trying.
Exactly. It's about silencing that inner critic.
Yeah.
And replacing it with a voice of love and support.
Yeah, because we all need that.
We do.
Yeah.
And setting boundaries with ourselves is just as important as setting boundaries with others.
Yeah, because if we don't have those boundaries with ourselves,
Right.
then we're not going to be able to have them with other people.
Exactly.
It's about honoring our needs.
Our limits.
Our limits.
And our values.
Yeah.
And it's essential for creating a life that feels authentic, fulfilling, and aligned with our deepest desires.
So we've talked about setting boundaries in our relationships.
Yeah.
Family, romantic partners, friends, co-workers, and even ourselves.
Yes.
So I'm curious to hear more about the spiritual dimension of boundaries.
Yeah, okay.
We talked about this a little bit earlier.
We did.
When we were talking about respecting God's boundaries. But I think it's worth exploring further.
It is.
Yeah, because the spiritual dimension is so powerful.
It is.
And it can really provide us with a deeper sense of purpose and connection.
Yes, and Cloud and Townsend, they talk about this quite a bit in the book.
They do.
They say that setting boundaries is not just about protecting ourselves,
Okay.
but also about honoring our relationship with God.
Yeah.
And they argue that God created us with free will. And that means we have the power to choose how we live our lives.
Right. We have the power to choose.
Yes.
And that includes choosing to set boundaries that are in alignment with our values.
Our values and our spiritual beliefs.
Yeah. So how do we connect with that spiritual dimension of boundaries?
So one way is to start by asking ourselves, what values are most important to us?
Yeah.
What do we believe in? What do we stand for?
Okay.
What kind of life do we want to create?
And once we have a clear sense of those values, then we can start to set boundaries
that support those values.
That support those values.
Okay.
So, for example, if you value honesty and integrity, you might set boundaries around gossiping or engaging in unethical behavior.
Okay.
Or if you value compassion and kindness, you might set boundaries around spending time with people who are negative or draining.
Okay.
It's about creating a life that reflects your deepest beliefs and aspirations.
Yeah, it's about walking the walk.
Yes.
Not just talking the talk.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's about recognizing that you have the power to choose how you live your life.
Yes.
Even if it means going against the grain or challenging societal expectations.
Yeah.
Another way to connect with that spiritual dimension of boundaries is to practice gratitude.
Gratitude, when we're grateful for what we have.
Yeah.
It's easier to let go of what we don't have and to focus on the abundance in our lives.
Yeah.
And when we're grateful for the people in our lives,
Right.
it's easier to set boundaries that honor those relationships without feeling guilty or resentful.
Because we're coming from a place of love.
Right.
Yeah.
Gratitude helps us to shift our perspective from scarcity to abundance, from fear to love.
I like that.
Yeah, and it allows us to connect with a deeper sense of purpose and meaning.
So gratitude is a game changer.
It is.
Okay, what else?
Another powerful practice that can help us to connect with the spiritual dimension is prayer or meditation.
Prayer or meditation.
Yeah, when we connect with our higher power, whether that's through prayer, meditation, or simply spending time in nature, we open ourselves up to guidance, wisdom, and strength.
It's like tapping into a source of infinite love and support. That can help us to navigate those challenging situations where boundaries are needed.
Exactly.
Yeah, because sometimes we need that extra help.
We do.
Yeah.
And remember, setting boundaries is not just about protecting ourselves.
Right.
It's also about creating space for others to grow and evolve.
Yeah.
It's about allowing them to experience the consequences of their actions.
Right.
And to learn from their mistakes.
Because we all make mistakes.
We all do.
Yeah.
And it's about trusting that they have the capacity to make their own choices and to create their own paths.
And that can be hard.
It can.
Especially if you're a fixer.
Especially if you're a fixer.
Yeah.
But it's so important to let go of that need to control.
Right.
And to allow others to be who they are.
Even if it's messy.
Even if it's messy.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of boundaries, I'd like to leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question.
Okay, hit me with it.
If you could set one new boundary in your life today, what would it be? And what positive changes do you envision it bringing?
That's such a great question.
It is.
And I encourage our listeners to really sit with that question.
Yeah.
And to maybe even journal about it.
Journal about it.
Yeah, or talk to a friend about it.
Yeah, get it out of your head.
Get it out of your head and into the world.
Because even a small step towards setting a new boundary can have a ripple effect.
It can.
creating a more empowered and fulfilling life.
So don't underestimate the power of one small boundary.
No.
Yeah.
You deserve to live a life that is both joyful and boundaried.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
Joyful and boundary.
A life where your needs are met, your voice is heard, and your spirit is free.
I love that. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the transformative power of boundaries.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found this exploration insightful and empowering.
Yes.
And we encourage you to continue this journey of self-discovery and growth.
Yes.
So until next time, keep diving deep.
Keep diving deep.
And keep setting those boundaries.
Yes.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.